welcome to part 2 of this little video series where we're going to be talking about the feelings that we have, the emotions that we have, and how they drive our actions, okay? In the last video I showed you how that feeling, which F stands for feeling, that feeling of distrust was driving my actions of being emotionally detached and thinking that people weren't safe. And when I showed up in relationships, the circumstance that I put down was going on a date, right? So I'm going to put that back up here again. We're going to talk about that same example. So C stands for circumstance. This is, again, the model that we're using, which is Brooke Castillo's coaching tool. This is the primary tool I use in my coaching business as well. So the C is a circumstance. It's something that's neutral, it's factual. There's no, opinion or anything. It's measurable. This is how much money I have in my bank account. This is how many pounds I weigh. I'm going on a date. And so when we're having a negative feeling or a negative emotion going on that date, it's going to drive a negative result. And the last one that we did was distrust. I'm feeling distrustful. I'm feeling cynical. I'm feeling apprehensive, right? These are the emotions. Why was I feeling those things? I showed you in the last video that it was because of what I was thinking. The thoughts that were in my head when I was going on those dates were, I only get crazy people, this never goes well. And so I walked you out through how all that played out and then how it totally created that result. It's that whole thing of like manifesting, right? Like people talk about manifesting. It seems woo-woo, but when you see it plugged into here, you can totally understand how it's like, oh my God, I had a thought that I only get crazy people. That made me feel cynical and distrustful. So how did I act when I showed up on that date? The A stands for action. I showed up as detached, on my phone, scrolling, talking to the bartender more than my date, just very emotionally detached. And the result of me showing up like that was that the only people that ever called me back from those dates were the people who thought that was a good thing. And those were usually dysfunctional people that had dysfunctional attachment styles that thought to themselves something along the lines of like, cool, this girl is not emotionally available and she's not going to require anything of me. I'm not going to have to like show up or be vulnerable or be myself. I'm not going to have to get close. And so that led to a dysfunctional relationship. And it proved my thought that I only get crazy people. I only get dysfunctional relationships, right? And so it's, again, and I mentioned that whole thing about how does this dynamic between like narcissists and codependents work? This avoidant, anxious, like needy versus, walls. Like how do those people attract each other, right? And that's a whole field of study on its own. But today I want to talk about when I identify that, so I'm feeling distrustful, how do I turn it around so that I can have a healthier relationship? Well, again, it always comes from the thought, right? So let's say the last one was I only get crazy people, right? Only crazies? Well, if that's what I'm thinking, and that's what's causing me to have that feeling of distrust, then that's what I have to change. If that's what I'm thinking, and that thought is what's driving that emotion, we process that emotion through, but part of processing emotion is understanding what's causing it. What's causing it is this thought that I only get crazy people. So what if I was able to change that thought? What if I was able to get to a place in my life where I knew with all my heart, and I believed it to be true, that I could trust my own intuition and I can draw healthy boundaries? If I was to think that thought, how would that make me feel? If I was ever to be able to get to a place where I could trust my own intuition and draw healthy boundaries, I wouldn't have to feel so cynical. Because it wouldn't matter how those people showed up. It wouldn't matter. They could be whoever they were going to be. It wouldn't impact me because I know that I'm not going to let dysfunctional people be a part of my life anymore in that kind of a close or intimate way. I can draw those healthy boundaries, and so it would make me feel safe. Now, this might be a different model for you guys. You guys might come up with different thoughts. You might come up with a different feeling. But for me, when I think this thought, instead of I only get crazy people, when I think I can trust my intuition, I can draw healthy boundaries, so the crazy people aren't going to get into my life in dysfunctional ways anymore. I can still love them, I can care about them, I can treat them with respect, but I don't have to get sucked into that dysfunctional cycle again, right? Of maybe anxious avoidant, pattern that's so hard one to break. And so that would make me feel safe to know I've got my own back. I know who I am. I don't have to be anxious. I know my self-worth. I know that I'm loved. I know that I'm lovable. I know that my worth doesn't come from anyone else. I'm not going to get that by going out and getting close to someone else or being in a relationship. That's not where my worth comes from. I don't have to be avoidant. I can share my emotions. I can listen to somebody else's. And that's okay because I know who I am. I'm secure. So what if I could get to that place and truly believe I can trust my intuition and I can have healthy boundaries. I can draw healthy boundaries. That would make me feel safe. How would I show up on a date if I am feeling safe rather than cynical? Maybe I'm attentive. Maybe I'm actually there and listening to the person. I'm not talking to the bartender or doing other things in order to avoid. I'm literally there to connect, to engage, because I feel safe. I know that whatever I find, I've got my own back. I'm able to deal with it. So I'm there, I'm attentive, I'm listening to them. I'm holding space for them to be able to be who they are. They can tell me about themselves. They can open up. It's safe for them. And I'm emotionally available. When I'm acting emotionally available, when I'm acting attentive, when I'm listening to the other person, when I'm making eye contact, when I'm telling them about who I am and telling them about my life, when I'm being authentic and vulnerable and open and just allowing them to see who I am. Now, this doesn't mean Brene Brown talks about that vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability, right? This doesn't mean that you have to immediately start telling them about, the sexual abuse that you endured as a child and, all this stuff that's different, right? That's maybe too much of a share, and that's not necessarily about in the interest of connecting with this person. So you really have to be aware of what you're sharing. And so like when I show up on a date and I'm sharing about my life and myself, for sure there are things that are vulnerable that I can share. And I might, say, yeah, well, I grew up with, a family that, I had a lot of dysfunction in my earlier childhood, or I had an alcoholic father, and that really impacted the way, the way that I experienced relationships for many years. That might be something that I share, but I don't need to go into all these gory details. That's more about me offloading my emotional pain onto another person. Does that make sense? The boundary there? It's a little bit different. Offloading emotional pain onto somebody else is not the same as being vulnerable or being authentic or just being open, right? So there's that little bit of, you can share who you are and about your life without going into that space of offloading. And it feels different. One is in order to connect to the other person and give them a vision about who you are, who this person is that's sitting in front of you. And you can do that, without all those details. When you kind of go into that, I think that moves a little bit more into it being more about you than thinking about that person and what they might, want to know about who you are and what shaped you as a person, in a relatively boundaried way. So when you show up as emotionally available, when you show up as attentive, you're willing to listen, you're willing to share your heart and who you are, it creates the option for that person to accept you as who you are. So it creates the option for mutual respect, because I'm seeing you for your authentic self. You're not manipulating me or trying to pretend to be someone you're not or hiding things. Like, I see you for you. And that's called belonging, right? That's another thing Brene Brown does talk about, is belonging versus fitting in. And so when we show up as authentic and vulnerable and we can just be who we are with one another, that sets the stage for mutual trust, for mutual love, for mutual respect. And that is a secure relationship, right? That's a secure relationship where we can each draw our own boundaries, we can trust our intuition, we can be real, we can be authentic, we can be vulnerable with each other. And, if something goes awry or somebody is violating those boundaries, we can trust ourselves to have our own back and draw those boundaries. And so all of that can come from this feeling of feeling safe. I feel safe to be me because I've got my own back. You can be safe to be you because I'm not going to judge you, or expect you to change even, or be something that you're not. Like, you get to be you. And if that doesn't work for me, then I'll go on my way. And it kind of just creates this space for us to each belong and be who we are, which I think is a really beautiful thing. And so that's an example of when I'm feeling safe, as opposed to feeling cynical, it totally creates a different result. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a visual of why these feelings matter so much when we talk about processing emotion, getting rid of the cynicism, bringing in safety instead, right? How that changes everything. And I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.